So this creates what's in organic agriculture, or people's somehow, I don't know where it comes from, but people get false assumptions. And they think things, and they say, well, nitrogen is just nitrogen. Why do you keep talking about all these different forms of nitrogen? Well, if you try to drink nitrate, you'll die, but nitrogen in your plant in your food makes you live. You see? It's not the same form. So the one form is not the same, so we want to concentrate and understand the different forms. Nutrients can only be supplied in inorganic form. Some people actually think that to some extent. It's like, well, there's no such thing as necessarily inorganic in the instance that it's all organic, okay? When we talk about NPK, we're actually discussing synthetic. And the real issue is where the production comes from. So how did they make that synthetic fertilizer? What energy went into it? So if they're burning coal or they're burning oils, right, to create that, that's really where people are more upset than the fact that it's nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium. The plant doesn't know the difference. It's where it comes from is the issue. Loss of nutrients cannot be prevented. That's not true. We will not lose nutrients in our organic soils because they're flocculated. So the flocculation binds the nutrients. It's in deflocculated soils, which is the inorganic farming. When they don't, and they kill all the bacteria colonies, then they leach the nitrates into the water systems, and then people get sick in the contaminated water tables. That's because they don't facilitate flocculation of the soils. Excess nutrients must be supplied. That's not true. We have enough nutrients and can provide enough nutrients to our plants, right, in a water-soluble form through composting. Simplified composting, bio-teas, this is enough for us to have really, really nice things. It's not necessary that we have to put extra. And remember, a plant can only take up 100% anyway. It can't take up 110. And that's how we know they cheat, because the excess is left in the soil. And the excess burns the soils, and that's what kills the bacteria and the fungi and deflocculates their soils because they put too much. Soluble and exchangeable nutrients are all there in the soil. They are, but we have to make them and work to make them acceptable. So we have to change exchangeable to soluble. The exchange is created through the bacteria. So if you lose your bacteria colony, there's no exchange. So nitrogen is nitrogen. Nope. There's many forms of nitrogen. Some are good, some are either harmful and unavailable to plants. So we need to understand that. Nutrients can only be supplied in inorganic forms. It's just not true. We can supply them in organic forms. Loss of nutrients cannot be prevented. We can stop erosion and things. So a swale, slowing down overland water flows. In the bottom of the swale, you're going to accumulate silts and organics, and that's going to help to stop the leaching that may have took place in the area that was having erosive runoff. It'll then get caught, and we'll use our swale beds as an nutrient absorber. And as I said here, every third year I rotate my swales, that I clean the bottoms of the swales, and then I put that into my garden because it's basically a nutrient capture system. Okay, that's what's happening. You go to the trees. We have lots of, my particular swale system, I don't plant fruit trees, I have legume trees. So our big swales are all legumes, and they're capturing the nutrient retention that has been lost in the broader scale agriculture. And then I can return that to whichever system I choose, and that's the nodules, so the little bacteria that we see. That's the colonies of bacteria that are going to facilitate on the nitrogen fixing tree. Excess nutrients must be supplied. No. The plant can talk with the food web, and they describe the nutrients that they want. It's proven scientifically that we can move the nutrients with mycelium, and so that's what we're going to work on. Soluble and exchangeable nutrients are all there in the soil. Well, factors affecting micronutrient availability in your soil is the soil texture. Working on the texture. That's why we were adding chars to have the balance of sands, silts, clays, and remember, char can substitute for that. Organic matter content is important. We add in compost to increase our organic matter content. We can test our pH. When we add compost comes out at 7, guys. But some plants will learn when we start looking at our plants in relationship to pH, acidic plants and alkaline plants. Then we can adjust the pH by adding minerals in a non-water soluble form, adjust pH, okay? And soil aeration, we can either do that for, as I described, with cutting in our compost, right? Adding in worms that will do that. So the bacteria and the worms will deflocculate or flocculate, which is grow. So the soil actually expands like a sponge. And nutrient interactions. We're going to then look at our biofertilizers tomorrow, how I can actually take rock dust, right? That I know the nutrient profile, and how I can use rock dust in a fermentation. So I'm going to ferment, which I will describe as anaerobic fermentation and or weed tea. And when I make my weed tea and I grow an anaerobic bacterial colony, they can eat rock. And when they eat the rock, it comes through their body in a water-soluble form that then can be fed to the plant. So that's how I remineralize the soils. So changing false assumptions. Some people find permaculture have an assumption that the world doesn't know a lot about this, but actually you'd be surprised the farmers do know. The soil scientists do know. It's more of a spreading the message than it is anything else. So this is an article in 2016 in the New York Times for the whole world. Cover crops, a farming revolution with deep roots in the past. So they didn't say permaculture, but functionally this is what we're talking about. So a quote, in this part of the field where we had planted cover crops, we were getting 20 to 25 bushels of corn more per acre than in places where no cover crops had been planted. So if after they do their corn, they come in and they put the cover crops, remember the plant to feed the plant, then they increase the production. One of the crops that they were using was called forage turnips. So what did they do? They planted turnips and then they ran pigs. The pigs went in and ate the turnips. So they got their free-range pigs to eat the turnips out of the field. The pigs turned over the soil and defecated into the field, and then they did that and increased their production. This is more organic farming techniques. I thought to myself, I've been pulling the guts out of my tractor, plowing my field all the time to remove compaction. They were running a ripper, which is the same as a yeoman's plow, 14 inches deep to try to break what's called a plow pan. So when they run the plow, it's typically 6 to 8 inches, and then the tires make a compaction layer. So then the water floods, and then the soils, if you have a lot of rain, become what is called sodic. They flood, and then that goes anaerobic, and it's bad for your soils. So then the farmer says, instead of doing that, I started to plant ryegrass instead. So instead of plowing, we plant ryegrass, and ryegrass has like a 2-meter taproot. So it bored the system with micropores 4 feet deep. So it went down 1.2 meters, okay, in the first year. And then he sold that as a cash crop, and he didn't have to plow. Let the plant do the plowing. Why do you run a tractor? This kind of concept. So far, on this farm, they use 12 different cover crops, including sunflower, sorghum, buckwheat, turnip, clover, millet, hairy vetch, and each of which delivers a different benefit to the soil. So it's just an excerpt of an article, but the concept is that whether they call it permaculture or not, or just organic agriculture, it's out there, this stuff works, and you can check it out. So you really start seeing a difference in your soil within 2 to 3 years, Mr. Rowland said. And the Rowlands, in this aspect, were trying to develop their farm. They're not fully organic, but they wanted to use less fertilizer. So they're trying to, say, walk into maybe someday being organic, but they utilize organic techniques, what we're teaching permaculture and organic agriculture, in order to reduce their fossil fuel input. And if they do that, that helps their bottom line. So they're utilizing less equipment, less fuels, and they have a higher profit margin, and they're basically building their soil fertility. You have to think about your asset base of your farm, right? It's easy to see that if you come back next year, guys, you can see if we build a new building, right? Is that easy? And then you could say, hey, wow, man, you're doing good. You built a new building, right? It's an asset, right? What about my soil? What about the asset base that I build on a daily basis of my soils improving, not degrading? So our plants will get better and stronger and better and stronger. So we can also measure in a permaculture sense. My bottom line is not just tied to the cash that's on the table. It's tied to the asset value I can hand over to the next generation, which is basically in the soil profile. So the practice of seeding fields between harvests not only keeps the topsoil in place, it also adds carbon to the soil and helps the beneficial microbes, fungus, bacteria, and worms to thrive. And that was in the New York Times. So that's an idea to say that it's an issue that we have right now is not about having techniques to help the world and fix our agricultural systems. It's standing up for ourselves saying, we're not going to eat that stuff anymore. You can't sell me this bad food. I don't want to buy it. And if they can't have a customer, guys, they don't have a business. So the farmers don't want to do it as much, and if we refuse to buy it, well, there you go. The market will shift. It's not that we don't know how to do it. It's just that if we just want to eat cheap food, guys, they'll go keep providing us with cheap food.